I'm Jacob Margolis. I'm the science reporter here at LAist. I've been covering disasters, fires, earthquakes for a long time now, including on a couple different podcasts called The Big One and The Big Burn. The Big One was about 7.8 magnitude quake in LA, and The Big Burn was all about the history of fire in the state, how we got here and whatnot. I thought it was fantastic. I would love it if the guests could come on up and I'll introduce you all. So Maiya May, yeah, you can come up, sit in any order if you want to sit right here, yeah. Maiya May has hosted Weathered on PBS for the past 4 years. She's a wonderful science communicator. Trip Jennings is the series director of Weathered. He's got the fantastic suit jacket, sports coat right there. He's long told stories like these working with National Geographic and has his own production company. Keegan Gibbs, we all hung out with him for the past hour. LA County Fire Community Brigade co-founder, filmmaker in his own right, and Lynnelle Bryant, who's a certified interior designer who's a co-owner of an architectural and design firm that's working on rebuilding in Altadena. So thank you all for coming. Again, fantastic film. So one of the as you explored in the film, like we've heard any number of different reasons for the fires having gone the way they did. Like you guys pointed out, there were all these debates over, would the fire hydrants have made a difference, additional crews. I think your takeaway is spot on. I 1000% agree. But it brings me to the question of how do you shift public perception so people see fire preparation as like a shared responsibility, having to do with building, having to do with engaging in community, rather than just like, hey, emergency responders show up and fix this for me right away. We'll start off with a small question like that, and any of you are welcome to answer.
Well, I think it starts with doing specials like this. I think that's why public media is so important. Trip, we had a conversation about this in the green room earlier. People need to get this information. They need to know why it's so important. I can't tell you how many people I've had to talk to, have had to talk to about why home hardening is so important. They just don't realize that there are just these small things that you can do that make a huge difference. And Keegan, you've been doing this work for a very long time, and I'm sure you've encountered people that why do I need to do this? Or they have hesitance. So I'm sure you can speak to this very well.
Yeah, I think there's a common misperception that it's not a misperception. I think it's a casual attitude that it's not going to happen to you, right? A fire happens in one part of your area, and it's not going to happen to me because it already happened in our area, so it's not going to happen again, right? Like the Woolsey fire happened in 2018, and people thought, oh, there's not going to be another big fire for a long time, 25 years. 6 years later, we had this. So I think it's a complacency. And in terms of how to encourage people, unfortunately, I think that what will happen is just as we're seeing now in Altadena and in Palisades, as 6 months goes by, as a year goes by, people forget. And they get back to, hey, let's just rebuild as quickly as possible, like we've seen in Coffee Park, et cetera. And unfortunately, I think that my conclusion over the years has been that financial incentives is unfortunately the thing that is going to force people to do things en masse. And I wish that it was a cultural thing that we could get to, but I just don't see it. I think that media like this is really, really important to get that out there because I think that we're in an age of media. That's my background, and I think that it's really powerful. I just think that there's a ton of other areas that aren't going to do the work unless they're absolutely forced to or dollars are dangled in front of them.
I'm curious how did you convince those homeowners to do those small things like the vents and the zone zero preparation, or did someone else go and talk to them? Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Because by the way, how many of you have actually even prepared for an earthquake? Because what I will say is we know an earthquake is coming, and and that prep thing is so difficult to get people to commit to, even on that scale.
Yeah, I think a majority of the people are people that were wanting to be prepared. And it wasn't like we were door knocking and going, hey, we're going to sell you home hardening. And they're like, not today. So it was people that contacted us and were like, hey, we want to become more fire resilient. And those are the thought leaders, right? Those are the people that are prepared or have already been impacted by fire that want to do that. So my hope is that with events like this, with events like Paradise, that we are going to hit that critical mass, and especially with events that hit LA that are so politically and culturally influential, that it hits a tipping point and that we can use houses that we've hardened as that kind of proof in the pudding to be able to say, here's the path. If you don't want your house to burn down, here you go. Here's the answer. And if it does, it's like, well, the information's out there.
Lynnelle, maybe this next question could go to you, because when I do think of home hardening, because a big part of home hardening is also going to be preparing your landscaping, essentially not having plants pressed right up against your home, wood chips out front, which smolder and are terrible when it comes to fire. You mentioned Coffee Park rebuilding after the Tubbs fire. The entire community has wood fences and wood chips. It's going to burn the same way it did, very likely, years ago. So I'm curious, when you're consulting with people, when you're talking about rebuilding, these conversations that you're having, I guess how much of a consideration, or are people okay with those design choices that you have to kind of, I guess, potentially push them towards?
Well, I think it becomes a responsibility of those of us design professionals to make sure that the client understands the need for it. There's so much, biophilia has been so much the buzzword, and so we all have, landscaping is the thing. And I remember just talking when Trip came over, and he said 5 feet of clear space. And, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, well, what about the bushes? And, we've got all the, and it's just a conversation, but it's so critical, understanding now, we just have to have that conversation, and we have to sell this argument, because it makes that big a difference. During the show, we were even mentioning not having that furniture in that 5-foot space. And it's like, oh my gosh, I was thinking, I already had planned my furniture, and it was gonna go where the landscaping would have been. But I think as design professionals, as builders, as building departments, the onus then becomes to those of us when we're consulting to make that argument and sell that. It really is a life and death situation here.
Are there any particular building choices that you see that are going to be kind of major sticking points where you have to go, okay, well, this is going to cost you an extra $1,000, which maybe in the grand scheme of building a home is not that much, but you're always like 10 grand over budget, and so it's you're stretching it already. Like, do you see any particular features that might become a problem in that way?
Any feature seems to be a problem. I hear from Mr. Charles Bryant over there, sprinklers seem to be a problem. Just the thought of adding the sprinklers into the building, the additional cost of running the water, that's one of those things. I think anytime someone has to do something different, first of all, they're already thinking that the architecture and interior design part is fluff. And we're having I had a conversation with a potential client the other day, and when he heard what it would cost to do the design work, he said, I don't even need that. I'm going to get ChatGPT to do my plans. And every little thing, just to even say, okay, we should really consider double pane, triple pane glass maybe in this, or we should do, they've been reading, knowledge is out there. There's just so much information, but so much misinformation. So trying to undo the damage of the misinformation, and then getting people to value in the long term, putting more money in it now will save you in the long run. That's the argument we have to make.
Maybe the real change we will see would either be implementation of stricter building codes, of which I don't think we have really around fire prevention and fire prep. Or as was mentioned in the film, obviously, maybe the market kind of decides like you can't get insurance unless you do X, Y, and Z. And actually, interestingly enough, we spoke to someone in Ojai who rebuilt after, I think it was the Thomas Fire, and he rebuilt in the same exact spot, was able to work with the local fire department, and actually has insurance now. And he's still in this high fire hazard zone. But one of the things he did was they actually piped the pool to a fire hydrant so that pool can be drawn on by firefighters if they needed to. So people seem, insurance not completely out of the question, depending on what you can build. So I would love to turn to you, Trip, because you've worked on a number of environmental kind of focused films, including a film about paradise, campfire, paradise, awful disaster. What do you think? Do you think we've learned anything from Paradise in particular, and has anything shifted since Paradise in kind of our understanding of fire, and in particular rebuilding after fire?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was one of my biggest takeaways from the production of this show was the conversation that we are having, both with fire professionals, with firefighters, community members, insurance companies, is really different. I mean, we have come a long way. I think in some ways it feels like, that we've got so far to go, right? We've got so many, like millions of houses to retrofit, to prepare, that are, close enough to wildlands as Altadena is in Palisades. But, when I was driving all over around Paradise in 2018, 2018. And, we would see all of these defensible space signs. And what the science showed us from the campfire, and this was really one of the first places this was studied, was that defensible space didn't matter at all in a wind-driven fire like that. Because the embers, as we saw, they just hit the house and they fall right next to the wall, and they catch whatever's there on fire, which is usually bark mulch or other plants, and they catch the whole house on fire. And so you could totally, mow your entire, all your trees down. But that was what fire services were saying, was defensible space. And since then, we have really, I see this shift, and it's very real. We are talking about home out preparation, and that's a huge difference. We have Lynnelle up here. The community brigade is, just as examples, talking to their community. And so I think that, the conversation has, we felt like radicals saying, it doesn't really matter what you do to your 30 feet away from your house. Just prepare the thing you don't want to burn, which is your house.
Is there anything that they've done up there in Paradise? My understanding is they have been one of the most progressive places when it's come to rebuilding. So is there anything that stands out to you that they've done up there that maybe people here can kind of reference? And
yeah, well, I'll first preface it by saying, not necessarily in terms of code. Understandably, we have a huge housing deficit all over, the United States, especially California, where I live in Oregon. And there's a need to build homes as quickly as possible, and there's a pressure not to put more restrictions on that with codes. Also, gosh, it doesn't really matter if your home burns down in the next fire. So, not a lot of code has changed. However, there are now a couple of certifications, designations. IBHS, which we saw in the film, has a wildfire prepared home designation, which has 2 levels. And what we're seeing, we saw the first house ever designated under that program was in Paradise. We went there and we filmed. It looked great. It's easy to have defensible space when it's already burned. But the home itself looked great. And what we saw is that home went from California Fair Plan to, market insurance. And
what was a feature of the home that was?
It was everything that we talked about, right?
Okay.
So it's the first 3, right? Class A roof. Almost everybody has that. If you don't have a wood roof, you have a Class A roof. But it was vents. It was zone 0. It was windows. It was hardy plank siding. So it was like concrete fiberboard siding. Stucco's great. Stucco's very popular down here, more so than there. Enclosed eaves and non-combustible. No wicks, like fences between homes, right? So the 5 feet, metal home, no wood decks, and
wood fences love to burn and send flames directly into eaves, and then the home burns down.
Right, and we heard stories after Paradise. After the campfire blew through Paradise, we heard stories of people who had stayed to defend their home, but their hose didn't reach across the street, and one home on the corner of the block ignited, and the burned down just that one home, ignited the fence, slowly creeped across the fence, burned down the next home. And over the course of 4 hours, they watched an entire block, an entire neighborhood burn down, one house at a time being wicked by the fence. And all that had to happen is one 5 foot 5 foot length of non-combustible fence, a gate that's made out of metal, would have stopped that whole house, whole block from burning down. And we're hearing that's now being talked about. Before the campfire, no one was talking about fences. No one was talking about the area underneath your decks, being enclosed so that you can't get, a bunch of debris in there. And that makes me really hopeful. I mean, it's not free, it's not immediate, but I think we are moving in a good direction.
I was going to ask you about the community brigade approach. And getting people involved.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that I don't think was in the film that I think is a major issue, is that home density, as he was talking about with the deficit with homes, that we are trying to squeeze as many homes into as many parcels or smaller parcels as possible, maximize square footage. What we saw in the Palisades is a lot of homes that are newer build that are class, what is that, 1A, 7A building code, right? 7A?
Oh, yeah, the 2008.
Our
code.
7A building code, right, in terms of fire resiliency, double pane windows. A lot of them have box eaves, but they're 10 feet, 15 feet away from the next structure. And we saw that firsthand with brand new homes that actually did have that 0 to 5, that did have box eaves, that did have double pane windows, that did have Class A roof. It didn't matter because the home density was too tight.
It would also seem to me through those neighborhoods, you had quite a bit of landscaping, even if it wasn't within, like directly up against the home, you still had a whole lot of palm trees. You had a whole lot of you can look through the street view images, and that seems like that would also probably contribute to that problem.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think too, a really important shift that we've seen with this fire or these fires more than any other fire in the past is that the narrative, especially from Chief Maroney, who was interviewed in this from LA County Fire, he said day 5 or 6 from the Eaton and Palisades fire, went on camera and said, somebody asked him, how do we prevent this from happening? He said, I don't think we can. And the reason why is because people have this perception that there's going to be a firefighter at their house, hopefully. And we have to take that perception and the firefighter equation, we have to take them out of the equation. How do the homes survive on their own? Full stop. Doesn't matter about a fire hydrant, doesn't matter about a pool pump, doesn't matter about a pool, all that. How does the home survive on its own?
I mean, there are so many parallels here with earthquakes as well, and the social sciences show that those immediately around you are going to be the ones that are most likely to help, and that's kind of the case in these fires as well, because there are not enough firefighters to come and extinguish any and all of that, which is quite scary. But that also brings me to the community brigade idea. I'm curious if you think that this should be, I know you all have been working with LA County Fire for a while now. Drew Smith, I think, over there, probably still. Has it been, have you found it, I mean, you're quite, what have been the successes and what have been possibly the challenges or the failures possibly where you don't see it as easily able to scale to kind of other communities?
And I think the model's scalable because I believe that there are resilient people in every community. Every wildland community, urban interface community, urban community, there's resilient people that you can tap into, that you can rely on. For me, the community brigade program, you see me out there wearing dirty yellows and I'm out there on the fire, but to me, that's the Trojan horse for doing the home hardening work. It's like I said in the film, it's not the sexy work that matters. And just because I have dirty yellows, it looks cool, whatever, that's how we get people involved. And then they realize, oh, I can only save a couple homes during a fire, but if I did all the mitigation, I could have saved hundreds of homes. And I think that that's the goal for our goal, and especially the people here that are from our brigade is how do we use this cultural acceptance of a radical acceptance of risk to transfer that to the home ignition problem.
And so, Lynnelle, you're involved in rebuilding quite a bit of Altadena. What are some of the conversations? I'm curious, like, what are some of the conversations, maybe the more surprising conversations you're currently having? I mean, it hasn't been that long since the fire happened, and you're already consulting on designs and whatnot. I mean, are people, how at the forefront of people's minds is the idea of building in a more resilient manner?
Well, I think initially people were, you had two different types of people. Those that had a knee-jerk reaction, I don't even want to talk about it, I don't want to deal with this, my heart is broken. And then you had those others, I'm going to build right away. And neither is really the best thought. I think you need to take some time to digest what's going on, really give yourself some time to think about what does rebuilding look like. But what we've noticed is that those that are serious about rebuilding are rebuilding a little more densely than they were before. So they'll say, you know what, I love my house. I just need one more bathroom. And then I'm going to add that ADU in the back, And so I think as time has gone on and there's been much more meaningful articles in understanding of what went on, and like you were saying yourself, there was so much blame, so much conspiracy theories. I mean, all the stories I've heard about the helicopters dropping the fire in certain neighborhoods, and it was just so much work to get past that. But as people are thinking it through a little bit more now, and they're seeing these stories, their willingness to consider the home hardening is just so much better. I just think that people are receptive, and we have an opportunity now, if we jump on it and if we take advantage, to really educate people on what it means to rebuild wisely. So we use that phrase, which was we just build back better. You just build it back much better than what you had. You can have what you had before, but let's do better than we did before. And people are willing and receptive to understanding what that means. And those that are willing to pay someone and not go to ChatGPT to make their own plan, understand what it costs and are willing to listen to what it means to do that.
And we were talking, many of the residents of Altadena are Black, over 50 years old, you said, I guess, inherited houses in certain instances. What kind of barriers are you seeing to kind of recreating or reestablishing that community with the same sort of feel, which was distinctly Altadena? As you rebuild, how do you maintain that? How do you recreate that? Is there any recreating it, or is it gone?
Well, it's very interesting because during the Great Migration, so many Blacks moved here, and the mindset was much more ambitious. Parents just bought land, and they were very receptive to the opportunity to own land and to generate wealth through home ownership. And you don't see that passed on as generation to generation the same way. I feel like we all feel like when we become successful, it's to move away, and then you could see that in the numbers, 40% Black, and now it's 17% Black home ownership and the population and so forth. So what's happening, and you take the fact that we're in our 60s, and then we aren't even the old people, in Altadena. And there was a gentleman my husband was talking to in the gym who owns a property, and he owns some other properties in his 90s. And he was gathering all of his stuff, when the fire came to leave. Now, that 90-year-old, and you think, his kids are in their 70s. Are they really going to build? I mean, who has the money and the time for 2 more years at $2 million, to rebuild? So we, once again, we have the responsibility to bring that value and impress that value upon the generations to stay and invest in the community and don't become successful and move away. Maybe you want to take over your dad's property, maybe your grandchild, maybe you want to pause just long enough to make it affordable enough for your family members to build and stay and develop that community. And I'm hearing that chatter now because people were not really aware. I mean, our kids were not really aware of the value that was in the community, you know, and they're seeing that now. And they're, you know, we're having this conversation even with our kids who've all moved away on whether it's time for them to start talking to some of these older folks and trying to invest in and stay here and make this their home.
I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but are we going to take audience questions? Would love to, if possible. Thumbs up from LAist crew somewhere. Is that okay? A thumbs up. Okay. Cool. So would love to open it to audience questions. If you can keep the question brief, we will have to kind of move through them. We'll start here with you.
Hi, I really enjoyed the film. It was really great hearing your perspectives as you're up on the stage. I just wanted to ask, I don't know how to, oh, hi. Oh, wow, that's loud. Okay, hi. So when you said that you have to dangle dollars in front of people to want to harden their home, I think we're ignoring that there is a vast majority of people that are renting, and there's a vast majority of people that are living paycheck to paycheck, and a vast majority of people that can't afford rent, that can't afford bills, that their landlords are scamming them, that, you know, they're raising their kids, and they were displaced and now homeless. I have friends who are musicians, and I'm a musician, and who are homeless now because of the fires. And I personally am remodeling my downstairs, and I don't make enough to make rent, to make bills, and I'm finding things on Facebook Marketplace. So I think by having that sentiment, we're ignoring the fact that there are many people that are vulnerable to being homeless more than being millionaires to be able to fix their homes. So I'm just wondering, what is an affordable option for those people to protect themselves from these fires?
A majority of the mitigation work, for the most part, is not costly. And I think that's a big misperception that people have, is that I can't afford it. The home that's highlighted in this, she took care of her own garden. She got rid of her wood chips, replaced it with lava rock. The screen on her vents is stuff you get at Home Depot for $10. A majority of that mitigation work is very, very, very cheap. It's just the time. And when I talk about dangling the financial carrot at the end of the stick, I'm really talking about the communities that haven't been affected yet, right? Altadena and Palisades are probably going to be rebuilt, hopefully in more responsible manners. But those are just two communities. There's a lot of communities that aren't hit yet that still have their head in the sand. And how do you pull their head out of the sand? They lose insurance. And that's the biggest piece that's going to happen. And it's going to happen in the next 6 months. We're going to see a very, very, very big whiplash in terms of how many homes are going to get dropped. Fair plan's going to go through the roof. They're going to be inadequately insured. And there's going to have to be incentives for people to do that work. And I really do respect and understand especially the financial disparity between the Palisades and Altadena. And my heart breaks, especially for Altadena, in terms of who was impacted as opposed to the Palisades. I don't have the answer in terms of how do we get the people that are financially strained to be able to get them to do that work. My hope is that there's going to be better programs out there at the state or federal level, just like happened for earthquakes or hurricanes, that were federally funded to help get people to come up to code, to standards. I hope that happens across California, and I hope that mandates do help encourage people, but I do think that the financial incentives is going to be one of the biggest pieces to kind of tip it in mass.
I think that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that, I hate to say this, but I think it's gonna have to get to a point to where we're experiencing disaster after disaster after disaster. And people are losing their insurance. They're not able to get mortgages. For policymakers and homeowners to really wake up and pay attention to what they need to do to harden their homes and their communities. I really hate to say that, but that might be a reality of our situation.
I was going to say, in addition, you brought up a very good point about the inequity in the rebuilding process and so forth. And that's something that I think we have an opportunity, again, with people's hearts being so open right now. And this is where we can, the partnership between private foundations right now that are flush with money, and those that, organizations that are flush with ideas, to partner together to come to solutions that will benefit those that fall in the middle. So those that are, that, for lack of better description, that are poor, there's resources available. Those that have money, you have the resources available. But for those that are in the middle, there's always been that gap of services. You're making too much money to get the Section 8 or the home funds and so forth. You make way too little to do it on your own. But we have that space where those of us, my husband is working with a group that called him and said, look, we have the money. There's the, people are willing to do this work now. We just need to know how to funnel it so those that are in need can benefit at this point. And so there are resources available, and the partnerships are critical, and the timing is so critical because it's so fresh on everybody's mind right now. And there's solutions that we're coming up with, and there's opportunities, and if we just have to be ready to go. And I think we are, and we can talk and see what we can do about that after.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. So to go back to the home density issue, because we live in an area of high home density, the setback requirement for an ADU is 4 feet from the property line, so it doesn't even meet zone 0. And I also lived in Chicago, and they did solve the issue after the Great Fire, even though they have very high home density, and they basically banned wood, which may not maybe happen here. But I'm wondering, what is, if you put zone 0 outside, what is the science on effective fire retardant materials for, that could be mandated in code that would make a difference even in areas of high home density?
What do you mean by fire retardant materials, like siding that?
Siding,
Okay.
Stucco, anything
yeah.
that, when you have homes that are close to each other, or is it just like a lost cause at that point?
Let me,
Yeah,
to
go
like
fire away.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's two ways to think about this, right? And it's very appropriate for us to think in the immediacy of, how do I prepare individual or, dozens of homes within hundreds, right? And so there is some degree of protection from the tempered glass, multi-panes, hardy plank or stucco siding. I've also heard, we talked to fire chiefs who were like, once you get home-to-home ignition, you're done. There's nothing you can do. But what we can do is, it's not home-to-home ignition when that, whatever ignited the Eaton fire in the canyon, it's not home-to-home ignition when it enters the community, right? It's not even a wall of flames when it enters the community. It's embers. And so we can do a lot to prepare, especially those homes around the edges and, a block deep or so or more, And so I think that yes, we should be having this conversation about how do we prevent home-to-home ignition, but probably the easiest and best way to prevent home-to-home ignition is to stop the number of homes burning from going from 1 to 10, right? To slow that down as much as possible. And in that way, we should think about everything that we do on our houses is for us, but it's for our neighbors. It's for our community, and it's for the community we want to continue living in, right? And so I think that, there is the individual home, but boy, I would love to see, Habitat for Humanity do a weekend where we do everybody's zone 0 and we do $20 per house of vent, to prepare for embers. And I think that is what switched in my mind, I think, in talking about this fire.
There are also some people in like fire researchers in Australia who have suggested, and New Zealand, who have suggested the idea of green fire breaks. And so around some of these communities, instead of trying to reestablish native vegetation, to have some sort of, you could do prickly pear cactus, which is, I guess, native in some areas around here, but vegetation that is wetter, essentially, that will smolder rather than necessarily combust right away, as chaparral is to do. And I think, I think there are a lot of questions about the kind of landscapes you want to see around here, too. A lot of those are not going to recover, and you're going to get a lot of invasives, and so you potentially have an opportunity. Other question? Yep.
I wanted to thank you for the film in general. It's excellent, bringing up great conversations like these. I do look forward to more. And I appreciate the last thing you said about landscaping and the fire protection that could provide. I feel like the loser in this conversation might be vegetation in itself, and someone who does ecosystem restoration. I appreciate the value of plants to all the living systems. And watershed is a big piece of how I hope we will consider future rebuilding. So it's not just the structures. Yay to everything Jack Cohen is saying. Yay to the work that you're all doing now. But I'd like to see us take a little bit more of a meta approach, systems thinking, to imagine what are the upstream causes of these conditions that create the fires in the first place, and forestry and our way of managing living systems isn't critical.
I completely agree. I don't think that, so just to address chaparral versus like forest, I won't go on an hour-long rant, I promise, but when we're talking like forested ecosystems, like up around Yosemite, increasing the number of prescribed burns and whatnot that we do, and there are important prescribed burns to do around here in certain mountains. In the areas that burn, though, I think John Keeley over at the U.S. Geological Survey makes pretty convincing arguments about too much fire in some of these ecosystems, the fire return interval being too short, and essentially destroying seed banks so the native vegetation doesn't come back. I think it's a worthwhile debate as to how we manage these chaparral communities and coastal sage scrub communities around like these neighborhoods. But yeah, I think it's a great thing to bring up and definitely a worthwhile discussion. I don't necessarily think that more fire on the ground in some of these areas would benefit, but yeah.
But in the urban centers, we want to just see vegetation that can serve as fire buffers.
Oh, 100%, I agree, yeah, definitely. Any other, yeah, sure, yeah. Sorry, we're just moving across, yeah. Yes, oh, great, wonderful.
I think what's really, I want to say thank you to all of you for being here and giving the insights.
Mike, I don't know if it's off.
What's shocking was that I was seeing like all the commercial businesses that were burning, and I'm pretty sure it's shocking to everyone too. And I think we talked a lot about like the housing, but what about like what can commercial real estate property managers and developers do from here on, and like your insight?
Do you mean in terms of commercial buildings being sort of architecturally different from homes?
Yeah, I mean, I thought like being in earthquake county, we have a lot of like fireproof and like fire codes for commercial buildings, but we saw a lot of like properties like churches, schools, businesses burned down too, and that was like the most surprising part.
I mean, it is surprising, and it just reminds me of being in Paradise with firefighters who had watched the Safeway burn, and they were all shocked because they were just like, you're not supposed to see commercial buildings burn. These are not built. They don't have the same vulnerabilities as homes. They were just like, this should not be happening. What's going on? I mean, it does turn out. So IBHS, the Institute for Business and Home Safety, does do tests on commercial buildings, and they have a bunch of research. And it's slightly different because the changes are slightly different, but the same principles do apply. The more that we can prevent those embers from starting the first houses or commercial structures. But I mean, you're right. It is a different architecture, and there are a small handful of different things. Basically, it has to do with ACs on the roof, and just the different design elements in commercial buildings, which I'm less of an expert in.
I think we have to wrap up shortly. I think we had one more question, though. Yeah. Oh, two more questions. Three more questions. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think we have to do a last question. I'm sorry. I'm sure people will be hanging out for a minute, though.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be hanging out afterwards. Love
And
to
thank
chat
you.
more.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming, too. This is great.
So more than a question, I wanted to say thank you. My husband is an architect, so I know a little bit more about some of these things than the average bear. But living here, because I live here in Pasadena, there's been very, very little conversation about home hardening. Frankly, none that I've heard. I've watched a bunch of videos with my husband, and we've talked about it. And we have friends in Malibu who still have a home, and they're one of only 2 houses on the block. Their entire block, all the way, they live right above the Getty, and every other building is gone. And they had very recently done some renovations and made some changes, including enclosed eaves, to their home, which my friend had grown up in, and her parents had, purchased brand new in the 60s, in order to try and harden their house against the fires. And it stands. There's not a single wall that went down. Their entire backyard, their patio, their metal patio furniture, all metal, not wood, was is a molten pile, and you can see the flames literally coming right up to the back, and there's a scorch mark on a back wall, but their house is still there. But yet there's almost no conversation about it. There's nothing I've never seen anything in the news. I haven't read a single article. I didn't know what the story was about before I got here, and I was surprised by the content, and I was kind of excited. It seems like it's not a very sexy thing to talk about because, enclosed eaves aren't very remarkable or interesting compared
Thank
to
you
a
for
lot
my
of
article idea for next week on my deliverables. Yes, I appreciate it.
So I guess I wanted to say thank you to all of you. And what is there, obviously, we can't fix everything, and there's so many layers of issues here. We've just touched on a bunch of them. But on a very small micro scale, what is the way that we talk to people about this? How do we make people think about it more? Because it's not a very sexy or interesting issue, and yet it is extremely impactful. So how do we get the conversations going, other than stuff like this?
Oh, I have a really good idea. I know a show that's premiering. It's gonna be broadcast next week on the 19th at 10 p.m. Sorry.
No, I think it's just having the conversation. I feel like a lot of homeowners switch out their appliances because their neighbor got that cool new electronic appliance. I think it's just having the conversation. Again, having more pieces like this out in the public, more articles being written about this type of thing. Just having the conversation. And these types of events are going to continue to happen. So I think the opportunity to have these conversations are going to be more frequent moving forward. So I would be optimistic. I know it feels like there's not anything really happening right now, and nobody knows about this stuff. But I think that'll change.
We do have to wrap up. We are pressing up against it. If you guys want to hang out and chat, though, would love that. I just want to say Maiya May, Trip Jennings, Keegan Gibbs, and Lynnelle Bryant, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for coming. Love the discussions. Really appreciate it, guys.